illustrious career spanning 5 decades has been marked by his insightful commentary on national and global affairs, with a keen focus on the intricate dynamics of Nepal, Sri Lanka, and China. From his early days as a reporter to his distinguished roles as an editor and a columnist, Mr. Shastri's contributions to journalism have left an indelible mark on the discourse surrounding India-China relations. Joining us in today's conversation is is Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale, a distinguished veteran of the Indian Air Force whose extensive experience in military operations and strategic planning brings a unique perspective to our discussion. His service and post-retirement contribution in the development of strategic systems exemplify his commitment to national security and innovation. Air Marshal Gokhale was awarded the prestigious Agni Award in 2013 for his post-retirement contribution to the indigenous development of strategic systems. Now, allow me to provide you a brief overview of Pune International Center. PIC stands as an independent think tank dedicated to fostering open dialogues and debates on issues of national significance. Our diverse verticals in domains such as energy, environment and climate change, international relations, social innovation, technology and national innovation ecosystem, urbanization and economic reforms, and national security catalyze informed discourse and evidence-based policy making. PIC is led by Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar and Dr. Kelkar and has an unwavering commitment to the values of the Indian Constitution and the UN Charter. As we embark on this enlightening dialogue between Mr. Shastri and Air Marshal Gokhale, we have the opportunity to explore the nuanced complexities of India-China relations, transcending conventional binaries, and uncovering the multifaceted dimensions that shape our interconnected world. I encourage each of you to actively engage in today's discussion and ask questions at the end of the session as we seek to broaden our understanding of the world around us. Thank you once again for joining us, and I wish you an enriching and thought-provoking session ahead. However, before we begin the intellectual parley, I kindly request Air Marshal Gokhale, Mr. Shastri, Dr. Ishita Ghosh from the School of Symbiosis, from the Symbiosis School of Economics, and Mr. Abhay Vaidya, Director, Pune International Center, to come up on the stage for the ceremonial book release. Thank you, Dr. Ghosh and Mr. Vaidya. I now invite Mr. Shastri to the dais to present an overview of the book.
Good afternoon, everybody. Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale and distinguished friends who are here, Director of the Pune International Center and my long lo lost and rediscovered, reconnected friends who have come here, and all the young people here. I'm really overwhelmed to see that there is a full house here for discussing a book on China. And actually, I'm not surprised. I'm personally overwhelmed, but not surprised. Because for long one associated thinking on China, on large parts of the world and all in this country with Bengal. But that might have been more because of the revolutionary fervor or passion or the ideological orientation. But long, long before that, Pune has been a cradle of lot of internationalism, especially interest in China. You've had from Pune, Maharashtra, you had Dr. Kotnis, of course, is the most famous and one of the pioneers who has immortalized India's name in China. And then you had another titan who was perhaps in all my readings of China, as I must have been as young as all of you were, even though it might be difficult for you people to believe that I was young, but I was. And one of the biggest names then was G.P. Deshpande, who used to write on China. And mostly we had to often find where he wrote. There was no internet or anything. And you got this copy of this magazine called Economic and Political Weekly by post only for subscribers. So you had to find who has got it, who will lend you the magazine, and then read G.P. Deshpande. And then, of course, you had Giri Deshankar and so many of these people. So, and then Pune itself has been home to some of the best minds in China. Actually, I am a little relieved that all of them are not here. Huh? Mr. Vijay Gokhale, Gautam Bambawale and all that. Because then I would feel that I have set out on a foolhardy venture or I am very brave. But I am told that they may be coming. So anyway. So, and then I really want to mention the fact that I miss a very big name on China and India-China relations, Mr. Chandrasekhar Dasgupta, who passed away. And he was also a very, very well-known and well-regarded name. Now, in the little, I will speak about the book for a few minutes, and then Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale will then take over, and then it will be left open to the floor to raise whatever you all want to ask. Now, it is not possible for me to separate the book, the process, and myself from what the contents are. The book and what it represents, it's a part of what I am in the sense of my expressions, my vision, and I might say my vocation. This is journalism, and what drives me in journalism. Today, of course, journalism is much more. You don't have to be a journalist by definition. You can be a writer, whether you are in economics, philosophy, or whatever the discipline. So, and what drove me both as a vision and a mission was to redefine the telling of stories. Every story under the sun has been told. They are nothing new. It is how you angle it, how do you perceive it, what perspective do you put it into, how will you tell the story. So when I went to China, I said, writing about China has been done to death. Of course, there are not even now adequate books in India by Indian writers and authors and diplomats and so on. We could do with hundreds, if not thousands more. But one felt still everything is written, whether it is in French or in the English language or German or all these things. But I said there must be a way that I can redefine the telling of stories from China for an Indian reader. And also for the Chinese reader who wants to know how an Indian sees them or would tell the story. And whenever we are telling a story, beginning with our epics in terms of good and evil, it is always through binaries that large sections of the people in India and China and elsewhere in the world too form ideas and develop an understanding of other countries. And it is no different in the case of India and China. And the binaries are what we get conditioned into. The right and wrong, good and bad, the devout and the godless, the agnostic, the believer. And then, of course, there are binaries of we are a democracy, they are a dictatorship, we are a free country, they are a controlled country. We are an open market economy. They are a state-controlled economy. But beyond all these, there is such a vast territory of society, politics, culture, civilizational values and ethos that remain to be explored and told about. You cannot go and pick. I think it all comes together the way one writes. After you write that you see, okay, something is geography, something is geopolitics, something is culture, something is society, and something is, let us say, just a story, or something is about economics, something is about politics. So, but when you write it, it is not by a category that you actually write these things. So, my writings in this book, the content of this book, is broad brushstrokes of all these areas. And briefly, I can say that there are short takes on all the big issues and subjects, all the big goings on between India and China. Between India and China, not only as neighbors, but between India and China in other forums like BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the United Nations, and other multilateral forums. Besides the various contests between these two countries in forums such as the Nuclear Suppliers Group and so on. So you have both what brings these two countries together and what are the issues that keep them apart where there is no meeting point. And broadly, in my book, the focus is more on the common interests rather than the differences. Because broadly, I would divide the relationship with any country, specifically with neighbors and China, into two categories. One is, are the differences more than common interests? This, I think, can be a defining point. Then one can overcome all the binaries. Or are the differences greater than the common interests? Once we say, for instance, with China, what is with China? Oh, boundary. Once you get stuck on that, you will never cross the boundary of the binaries. Because the boundary issue has always been there. Is it the limitations of our leadership, their leadership, or the conditions are such? What are the global interests? Which other countries are involved? What are they pursuing through forcing these countries and forces and sections within these countries to different positions? All these things, there can be so many views on these things. There can be no single view. And there is no single book, similarly, which can capture the entire spectrum of views on the gamut of India-China relationship between them, as well as the world of what constitutes their many relationships, the many threads of their relationship. So I have focused on certain facets of these, and I have brought a certain perspective to it. And yes, I have willfully chosen to be provocative because to make us think in new ways. Like one of the things I'm really surprised about, which not many people are writing about, it's not been mentioned very much in my book, was there was something called Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar Forum, where you had people on the boundaries of all these four countries, and you had areas there where they would meet. And I was in Sikkim, Central University, Gangtok, for a lecture, and Pranab Mukherjee, who was then the foreign minister, he made a statement in Delhi that we want peace on the periphery and progress and development at the center. Which means you are looking at people on the borders of India, on the periphery, as okay, their business is to maintain peace for people to progress at the center. But what about their life? What is it that they want? And people who have mapped their life, they will find that the people on the borders of Myanmar, India, and China where they meet, they have more in common in terms of their habits, their lifestyle, their food, their seasons, their crops, their attire, than there is between people in Delhi and Beijing or Rangoon and Dhaka. The differences between these capitals are more than the commonalities between the people who share particular territory about. Somehow that whole forum has got buried under this Belt and Road Initiative. Why I mentioned this? Boundaries, we don't have to necessarily think whether it has to be this side or that side. Boundaries can also rise above binaries. And this has been done in more advanced societies. I say advanced within quotation marks. Advanced not only in economic terms, but also in terms of their thinking and solution. In Europe, for instance, you have the solution between Sweden and Finland, how they resolve. Now, if you land at Copenhagen airport and you take a metro from there to the You can decide 15 minutes you go this way, you go to Copenhagen. You go 15 minutes the other way, you go to Malmö in Sweden. And many of you, when you travel to these places, you will see how the economics, politics, and geopolitics and financial policies of these countries are centered around these kind of new things. So boundaries need not be cast in stone or be defined by fences. And some years ago, there was a meeting between Putin and the Japanese Prime Minister Abe. And there is an old issue, I don't know how many of you know, that technically World War II between Russia or the Soviet Union or Russia, whatever, and Japan is not yet over. They have this issue of northern territories which is not yet resolved. So one of the things they discussed, about which I wrote a piece, I don't know if it is there in this book, I don't recall if I mentioned, is that they decided on joint development of the border. And I have seen joint development of the border in some parts of Central Asia, where China has worked with Kazakhstan. And what is it that goes from Kazakhstan to China? It is vegetables. So just like you would find in your vegetable market here, when I went to the customs there, it is not all this glass and Chinese steel and all which I saw in Pune airport or any airport you find as customs. Customs is a chap there, he just says, no, they put these vegetables and fruits and all through that thing, they take it out in the gunny bag, then they put it on a cart and take it around. So we can change our conception of these spaces, of these filters, of these barriers, what they shall process and what they shall release, and accordingly define the boundaries. I don't think the boundary problem will be ever resolved in my lifetime or his lifetime, but I would definitely commend all of you to think that there can be more in common between India and its neighbors, including China, and the boundary need not be the defining barrier to your thinking, and make an attempt to rise above the binaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shastri, for the concise yet comprehensive overview. It's a great point that he made about the centrality of boundary and international relations, and something that we all need to ponder about in spite of what our media tells us. I would now like to request M. Marshall Gokhale to commence the conversation and lead the discussion with Mr. Shastri on his book.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Once again, good afternoon to you, all of you. It's nice to have very senior members of Pune International Center as well as Symbiosis, and of course, students. I see them in large number. Mr. Shastri, welcome to Pune. I'm told that you were coming here after 10 years. But give him a round of applause because, he has also written for Sakal. That is a typical newspaper that all of us get up in the morning and read, Sakal. That's morning. Yes. So a big round of applause. He's a very seasoned journalist, as it was introduced, and has a ringside view of China because he's been on the editorial board of China Daily, Xion, as well as on many other journals of within Beijing itself, which are produced. And now, of course, as a producer, he writes for a very famous TV program that we see. Actually, that anchor is not there, but even then, the Xion actually is a very impressive TV channel we all look at. But it was, we have mentioned about 1962, which is the starting point where most of us in this crowd remember, where we had the defeat. And that is what triggered my brother and me to join the Army and the Air Force. After that, in 98, 3rd of May, after all that Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai which had gone past, 62 took place. There were skirmishes in between, but nothing serious. But it was George Fernandez who happened to call it a threat number 1 soon after the Chinese delegation had left back for Beijing. And then, of course, you have covered in this book, which since you mentioned that your period is only from 2008 to 2022, because you accompanied Prime Minister Manmohan Singh on the visit, and thereafter you stayed back and continued your career for a while in China. You talk about Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi having given some sort of input that could be a possibility of a peace treaty that time. Narasimha Rao, there were a lot of other agreements which took place. And then there was, of course, you come to the recent times when there is Prime Minister Modi, and especially Modi going to a place called Xi'an, which is also the birthplace of uh, the home place of President Jinping. So with the result, there is a lot of canvas that is covered. I must say this book, as you see in the introduction of the book he writes, that's a new age book. It doesn't go chronologically. It doesn't go with any particular theme or any ideologically, but there are different chapters and very well structured chapters, I must say. So compliments to you once again.
Thank you.
So let me start. I'm going to take about half an hour to question answers and thereafter throw it open to the students in particular. At the moment, like you say, binaries, and I like the quote that he has put on top, the Chinese proverb, that people don't trip on the mountains but on the molehills. At the moment, we have tripped on the mountains. And while your end, you say that why can't the trade be the foremost and then the flag can follow? At the moment, the Indian policy is the other way around. That we must resolve the border issue, the boundary issue, preferably, if not at least the border issue, disengage, and then thereafter see, because trade is going on. But like what your book talks about as to why can't we do more and more people-to-people contact, and why can't we even progress onto that kind of a front? At the moment, the policy certainly, and general public, doesn't look at China from that angle. It still looks at China in a bit of a hostile way, especially because out of the 15 neighbors, we are the only ones where the boundary issue has not been as it stabilized, or rather it's been accepted. And then there is the so-called belligerence which happened in Galwan Valley, where they were supposed to use only sticks, but then barbed wire was used, all that. So our media is very busy at the moment, naturally talking about anti-China, as you would like to mention it. And you have very rightly mentioned about the media's role in this entire thing. So I would like you to draw attention to your career as a journalist in Beijing, where you have been writing for these people, Delhi initially, thereafter to China, Delhi, and how censorship has been in that particular, editorial way. Did you have an editorial policy that you could not transgress, or were you free to write whatever it is? You have mentioned some things. One odd issue about the, you have mentioned is where we had the chemical, fallout at, so all those kind of a thing, you can just elaborate a little more on.
Thank you. Thank you, Air Marshal Bhushan. I think you touched on quite a few points when you say you want me to speak about what I have seen there and how I have seen these things. So I don't know if all of you here are only students of economics, or are there also students of mass media and other disciplines. But there are important sections in this book which tell you a lot about China's media, about the media in China and how it functions, of which there are not many accounts, definitely not the English language from Indian journalists, although there are a few reports here and there. I have kind of put it together how think tanks in China work, how media institutions work, how they set the agenda, how they cut the agenda, how they take forward policy. So when you ask about how I found it to work in the media, first and foremost, I left behind the thought that, okay, India and China had a war in 1962, and India was worsted in that war, and it is all, the winner doesn't need to remember a war, but the one who did not gain the upper hand will always remember the war. That is why on the 50th anniversary of the 1962 war, I have mentioned that there was a meeting at the Observer Research Foundation where one of India's diplomatic titans, Mr. K. Raghunath, Rangnath, who was ambassador to China, was also there earlier as a young diplomat, and he was physically manhandled and everything when India-China relations turned hostile. And he has written a series of 4 books, and this was being released and by Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, who was the National Security Advisor, and who himself is an authority on China. And he said, we find far more written about the 1962 war in the Indian media than in the Chinese media. And he says, it is hard to separate fact from fiction, speculation from the imagined when you read these accounts in the Indian media. So there are a lot of preconceptions that we have. So when I went to China, I didn't think it was for me to settle the account of the 1962 war. And I am sure if Air Marshal Bhushan also goes, he will not be thinking like that. It is a different thing that when General Manoj Naravane was releasing my book, he said that the Chinese will not invite me. If they invite me, they will give me only a one-way ticket and I will be shot. I think maybe he dramatized it because he was the chief of army staff when Galwan happened. And nobody could have been more affected by what happened to his men than by General Naravane. Yet at the same time, he is not influenced by what happened to the extent where he says, no, we have to avenge this. No, he says we should follow the middle path. Let us overcome the binaries. Because the binaries are the cause of it. The binary is not caused by the conflict. The conflict is caused by the binary. And as I've said in my book, there is no one single reason that can be attributed for a conflict. There are a number of factors. What caused it? Why did China do it? What provocation? None of us really know every little detail that is required to be known about it. For instance, often people say, but what is the discussion going on between the military commanders? When Prime Minister has said in Parliament that nobody came in and nobody has occupied anything, then what are the discussions going on about? Okay, if I start explaining these details, I think it will run to several hours. So I did not carry any of this baggage. The larger baggage I had with me, which could have been more oppressive and disabled my functioning, was to carry the burden of Anglo-American journalism, in which I have been schooled, trained, and been successful. So to think like a journalist would think in India or in the UK or in the US or in the so-called open societies of the English-speaking world. But it was very difficult for me to overcome that. But I tried. And I said, I have to write for a readership. So what do I write? If I say, okay, this hostility is there, fine, everybody knows about that. And better for me to say how these stories work. So I tried to identify areas that are common. One of the areas I have identified is the Bhopal gas leak. So the Bhopal gas leak, which is a major case of industrial genocide, which is the second such thing after what happened in Minamata in Japan early in the last century, is a multinational was involved. The Indian government could not face up and get justice for its own people. People are still suffering the after effects of this. So when these people were convicted after 26 years for a few 6 months or something like that, everybody in China was aghast. So I pointed out, and that was at a time when the G8 was meeting in Canada, G7 or G8, and both India and China were invited to the high table. Both Manmohan Singh was going, and I think it was Wen Jiabao or Hu Jintao, one of them were going. So I said, the developing countries go to the high table to discuss the problems of the developed countries. Because they were whole of Western capitalism was in a funk, in a state of disarray, if not collapse, after the financial crisis of 2008. Why should these countries go there to discuss the problem solving for them? We have to go for our problems. Why could India not get Union Carbide, which killed thousands of people in Bhopal, to quickly and quietly pay up the cash, like the US could get British Petroleum to do when there was an oil leak in the Gulf of Mexico? This is about the power balance. So these are the interests of what one might call developing countries. So this is one. The second, yeah, this, yeah. The second thing is that in a newspaper office, how does it function in Beijing? It functions like a Communist Party office or like any political party office. That they have an agenda, what the paper should say today. And I might write something, that editor may say, can you change this to that? But beyond that, there are many rows of opacity. I don't know who is consulting, who is pulling the strings. I don't know that. Their command of the English language is not as good as mine. But what I write in English, they know if they want that word or that phrase or a different sentence. They know actually one of the most amazing things I found was there are many Chinese editors, both young and middle-aged and old men and women, who are bringing out English publications with very poor fluency in the English language. You know? But later I realized this is not surprising. There are many people, for instance, with whom I can discuss English literature. Can you? There are many people with whom, for instance, I can discuss English literature in Marathi or Tamil or Malayalam. They know the literature, but they can't do it in English. So I find there's a similar situation. Second thing I found, there is no hostility when you meet people. Many people from here, quite a few people I know came, visited me wherever. They say, but is there hostility like it happens in racism? People are beaten up in London, Australia, and all these. I said, nothing like that has happened. It doesn't happen. Quite, and all the people who came, who stayed, they were quite surprised that actually there is not very much interest in China. If you look at the newspapers, most days there is nothing about India in the Chinese newspapers.
Actually, you did mention this in your book also, that the Indian journalists would be amazed to know that the Chinese don't look at India at all. They don't cover India at all. And actually, it's my experience also when I was visiting China, and I happened to ask a few people as to what are the views about India. They said, look, we are more concerned about what the Japanese did in Second World War than we are ever talking in terms of India. So you are right in a way that India doesn't feature in the Chinese newspaper. But I want to draw your attention to social media, because we hear a lot about the Chinese social media. And one of the ambassadors told us that the Chinese are concerned about their own people getting more and more free because of this social media. And the Indian democracy is something that they look up to. Because as you know, we are a very vibrant democracy, and going for Lok Sabha election shortly. And that is what worries the higher authorities in China. So what is your take about social media, especially talking in terms of one-child policy, which has now become two-child policy, three-child policy, but it is not working. There is also this talk about lie low, lie flat. The young Chinese don't want to work. They would much rather, get some sort of degrees and go across to US or to Canada or anywhere else. So how do you look at the Chinese society in the years ahead?
Okay. I think you've touched on 3 points. I'll try to answer. One is social media. One is how is young Chinese in the media, where would they go, what they would do. And third is how it affects society. About social media, the important thing is China has its own social media vehicles. They have an equivalent of Twitter, it's called Weibo. Then they similarly have their own equivalent of Facebook and LinkedIn and all these things. So you have something like Baidu, which is probably far more powerful, reaches far more people than Google does. And that is why there was a huge campaign by Hillary Clinton. This was in 2010. That wanting that there should be internet freedom in China. They said this is the fifth freedom, after the four estates, this is the fifth estate. But this was primarily because they wanted more entry for Google and Microsoft and all that. And actually, although Google later made a lot of noises, in the initial stages, they had agreed to all the conditions that China wanted. And they also displayed the boundary map as China wanted, because they had more business interest, more to gain financially by doing what China wanted. It is only when that changed that they made these noises. So this was out of business interest. And Google was also deeply locked into the political campaign of the Democrats, beginning with Obama, even from when he was a candidate Obama, even before he became president. So on the one hand, they have social media. Social media is extraordinarily vibrant in China. It is not dull, it is not full of state propaganda, no. We would be very wrong to think that. It is as much full of state propaganda, government propaganda, party propaganda as social media in this country is, with the difference that here we have to deal with the propaganda of many parties There you have only one party and one state and one government. That is not the case here. But the difference is that there is a certain vitality to the opposition there. For instance, I don't know how many of you might be too young to, but there are people here who will remember this mayor of a city called Chongqing, Bo Xilai, who was a member of the Politburo. He was a very, very powerful boss, where he used to come to parliament or for the party plenums. Even the journalists used to clap and applaud him. I criticized them in the global times when I was there. So I said, it's not the job of journalists to applaud. Listen, they have to cover what he says and do it critically. And they carried this piece. So then I followed Bo Xilai's career. He was arrested. He was part of the corruption deal. His wife was involved in a murder of something. Now, there's a lot of criminality to his political conduct. But there is also, I looked at by a different logic. He was the mayor of a city which is perhaps the most densely populated city in the world. Chongqing's population was something like 35, 36 million in 2009. How do you run such a city like this without a kind of a network that includes a lot of illegal and criminal, and you can't control a city like that given so much of crime that is there in China and which is not acknowledged. So, but when Bo Xilai was arrested, I remember there were 500,000 micro blogs that erupted on Chinese social media. All their internet firewalls, everything collapsed. Which tells me, like in Tiananmen Square, that the Chinese, their dissidents, those who are unhappy, they will rise to protest. Not when Hillary Clinton, the US or India think something is an issue, but when they are moved by something that is happening within their country, and they feel fighting that, overthrowing that, will bring about change for the better. They don't want to lose what they have. They have excellent economic conditions today. They have excellent social conditions. They have excellent educational, medical, infrastructure, transport, all these things, world class. They would like things to get better. So after Tiananmen Square, there was a long spell of liberal regimes by Jiang Zemin and then Hu Jintao and everything, and it became one of the world's most permissive societies. There was no part of the West, not even during the 60s of the hippie movement, which was as permissive as China was in the first 10, 15 years of this century. It was extraordinarily permissive, including in sexual permissiveness, and all values from all over the world. So, social media in China, and now recently, they have attacked a lot of rich people in China. And they say the party is favoring these people. Then some time ago, Jack Ma proposed a theory, and which was taken up by a lot of managements in India, where he said people should work 9 to 9 into 7. That is, people should work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. And so when Jack Ma said this also, there were a million bloggers who criticized this. So periodically you will find these things. Second thing, how do you find out where there is trouble in China? You can find out if you read between the lines, and you must learn to read between the lines and also the lines. There is something called the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. You can remember that, CASS. It's a very influential international academy because you have something called CASS in Pune also, I think. So they bring out an annual report. In that annual report, you will see, oh, there were 98,000 mass incidents in the course of the year. They will give you the details. They will not give you the details whether there was firing, how many were. But if you follow that trail, you will know what were the incidents. So this is how Chinese society functions. So the second point you are asking is about society.
And the younger generation.
Yeah. The younger generation, just like in India also. When I teach in a journalism school, all of them, they learn what they want. They are all progressive. Many of them are even radical. Then when they come for an interview, whether it is to WION or Times of India, I am not the only interviewing authority. They know, they are smart enough to say exactly what they know the employers want to hear. They will say that. They will say, nahi, ये बोलने से ही नौकरी मिलेगा. बाकी हम जो करना है हम कर लेते हैं. I will write the poetry I want. I will do the Facebook post I want. I will apply for the universities I want. I will do the courses I want. But here I have to do this work, put on this cap, and move that thinking out. So a lot of people who worked with me in Global Times, which is a state-owned newspaper, many of them moved to the South China Morning Post, which was a part of the Free Bastion that Hong Kong was. That paper is now owned by Jack Ma, but they still cater to a lot of foreign interest. The same reports are written with greater objectivity from a different perspective. The second thing, many of them have moved to working for the Wall Street Journal because they kept their politics down and they said, no, the world is interested in doing business with China. If you understand the Chinese economy, if you understand the Chinese business, culture of business, and you can help foreign companies get in here, then you have a way to success. And one of them who was there, see, I think most of the Chinese in the Chinese newspapers, they are probably paid less than half or a fifth of what they call expat journalists are paid. She might be my boss, but she probably doesn't get 30% of what I get, but she calls the shot. But that is no longer the case. Now, this guy now, I saw one of his posts, he earns $22,000 a month and he is in his late 30s because he knows how to create those conversations and channels that will open up business for China and help businessmen find their way. So this is what, so nothing is lost. And most young people in China are like one of the persons who was my boss in Global Times, a Chinese woman. She must be also probably early 40s now. She is in California. They launched Global Times International Edition there. She was helping out them. She does what they want there. And she writes for certain media in California. She's a US citizen, but she has a home, she has family, she has investments in China. Her thing is, okay, I'm a free person in the US. When I come to China, I keep my mouth shut, I go around, I enjoy my life. So many of these people are living these split lives. Some of them are quite happy. I'm sure many of them are troubled that they have to do these things. But there are also young people who are unhappy, who feel they have to stay in China and fight. And you can find, like I said, now suddenly they have started talking about rich people who are making the rules of the society. They have attacked the Communist Party for having too many rich people. Jack Ma is a member of the Communist Party. They say they are driving the party in a different direction. So there are people who are angry with the Communist Party. They are not keeping quiet. So there are these groups. And you will find there are certain bookshops, they are called the Maoist groups. They are to the left, because in a way, there are many people who say, what is the difference? How is China a revolutionary society? It is as much a capitalist country as any other country in the world. And it has got a lot of social malaise in addition to that. It doesn't have the infrastructure, the social infrastructure. So all these questions are being, I remember they released a film on the 60th and 2009. Okay, the 60th anniversary of the Chinese Revolution, 1949. They had all the great stars of China who acted in Hollywood and Singapore. And then a lot of the Chinese, millions of them, they trashed these films on the social media. They said all these people have gone out, they enriched themselves making money outside, and they are showing themselves as heroes in China. What have they done for China? Why should we see this film? So when this kind of thinking is there, I think the state also allows them to let off steam. Because if you don't let off steam, it can lead somewhere else.
Thank you. You mentioned about the young men, and I think in your book you talk about Jasmine Revolution.
Yes.
How far did it succeed and how did it go? And second thing I want to know as to, in your opinion, what are the Chinese weaknesses, or what are the areas that I'm told that there is though they are food sufficient, I mean, in the sense they bring food from outside, but they don't grow inside. Their total cultivable area is very less. And also because they are upper riparian state, most of the Southeast Asian countries are all the time sort of worried as to what the big brother would do. So you think that if a power has to rise peacefully, isn't it better that he takes everybody along than to be so-called a one-man show where you find that belligerents or moving forces or being strong, whether it is in Indo-Pacific, whether it is with Vietnam, with anybody else. And there is there is this business about, even with India, not settling the boundary issue is actually creating hurdles for trade to grow leaps and bounds, like what you mentioned. That there is so much we can gain from China. Why is it that they would not want to collaborate, or why have a compromise with India and move ahead?
The question of the boundary issue in India is very, very complex. They wanted to settle it. In fact, I was among the few journalists invited before Prime Minister Narendra Modi went to China in 2015. And they invited us to give us a briefing before the Prime Minister's visit, or usually a person from the other country comes also there. So kind of to do a series of curtain raisers on that. I also went to Xi'an, the home place, and the places where Prime Minister Modi was to go later. Now, many of them said that we had proposed a solution to the boundary issue. Deng Xiaoping had mentioned it to Rajiv Gandhi. So again, that controversy came up, what he had proposed, whether it was the reception for it was adequate, why wasn't it taken forward? One thing is very clear. This is probably easier for China in its present state of development, or even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, to have come to terms with India on the boundary issue. But one is, I'm not saying this as a criticism or as the cause of conflict, but China is by nature has always been an expansionist power. Expansionist. Whereas India has not been an expansionist. And just like imperial powers of the West, like US, Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, all these people, China is also an expansionist power. It has not been a militarist power like Japanese. It's not accused of great military cruelties like Japan has been. So it's not been military, but it has this expansionist tendency. So now, but at that time when they raised it, there were great expectations from Prime Minister Modi's visit. What will he do? What will he say? But nothing was said. Why? Because first, you need to have a political climate at home, where you can come to terms with them. Now, once you have created a situation of hostility, and I feel there is a certain language, there is a certain kind of protocol one has to follow. Like, you will not find any Western countries, regardless of the number of parties that they have, that you will not find them talking about countries with which they have a conflict like Indian political parties do. Like if they are in opposition, they are saying one thing. When they are in government, they are saying something else. Whether it is the India-US nuclear deal, which BJP wanted, but when Manmohan Singh became the Prime Minister and then he signed it, they criticized it. Then Brajesh Mishra, who was the National Security Advisor, he came on television and he put gave the quietus to the controversy when he said, no, we wanted this, this is in the national interest, this is a bipartisan issue. So I think unless countries can rise to that level of statesmanship, and also now in recent years what has happened is somehow this tendency of racial hostility has also crept into Indian society. Like people can't recognize our own people from the Northeast. They'll say, are they Chinese? And I remember in Noida in Delhi, which is a suburb, a lot of these Chinese who were working there, they were targeted. And then in one of the pieces I wrote that it's very difficult. Once I say somebody is a Chinese, how do you tell people who think somebody from Nagaland or Manipur is Chinese? How do you tell them they are not Chinese? And how many Indians, once they develop this kind of hostility, can they distinguish between a person of Chinese ethnic origin in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, in China? So one thing is you need to prepare a population. Political leadership is about a population being prepared for hard decisions that the state can take. So unless that comes, there can be no resolution of the boundary issue. So it's a historical burden. It's best to leave it aside to be sorted out when the time is ripe for it. But if you ask my personal opinion, I think as long as Xi Jinping is the president of China and as long as Mr. Modi is the Prime Minister of India, I don't think there can be a political meeting ground between them. Whatever political meeting ground was there when they had good cordial relations, they met each other, lot of bonhomie was displayed in Mahabalipuram, Sabarmati, all that. That is now so much history, it has been swept in the past. Today the climate is very different after Galwan. So one has to, whatever was achieved in the 45 years after Rajiv Gandhi's visit has been shot down in Galwan. Galvan also tells us one very important thing, that when you have the nuclear bomb, it is no longer a deterrence to conflict. So nuclear powers can still get into conflict, which can be very dangerous. It is a different matter that if India and China get into a conflict, China will be the greater loser, not India. The second point you raised was about why can't a power rise peacefully? There is something called the Thucydides trap. I don't know how many of you have come across that term. No power can rise peacefully. The attempt of any power to rise will see other countervailing forces trying to keep it down. And this is as old as history. You look at what happened when Italy and Spain were both very powerful, and Portugal, they were all Catholic powers in Europe. The Vatican didn't want a conflict between them, but it saw that its conquest would also be religious, extend the power of the church. They said Spain goes to the west and Italy goes to the east. So Italy had some small colonies. But then Portugal, they let them go both to the east and to the west. Then again, you had something called the Monroe Doctrine more than 100 years ago. What is the Monroe Doctrine? Monroe Doctrine is no other power can enter the American continent. That is, neither Soviet Union nor China nor anyone can come into South America, which is considered the backyard of the US. So this doctrine was propounded by the Monroe Doctrine. So this is one aspect. There will never be, because no existing power will the 5 members of the UN Security Council step aside and make space for India, South Africa, Brazil, Iran. No, they won't. Why would they? Whoever has power, it's like you're sitting in a reserved compartment in a train. You will not vacate your seat for those who are waiting outside to get inside. So this is the second thing about power. The third thing is, power is what power does, or what power does not allow to be done. Now the South China Sea, the problem with Philippines, Vietnam, all these things. I don't think it is even about territory. I don't think it is about sea or anything like that. Any big power will reject all institutions, all rules. What is China trying to do? It's trying to do many things. I can't go into all of that. But what I will say, China is trying to say, we are a power, we will play by our rules. Just like that is what US did, that is what Britain did when it went to war against Argentina, that is what France did. What is France doing in Lebanon today? Why are they still ordering Lebanon what they should do? You know? And so it is all big countries, they have rejected this International Criminal Court. US, India, China, all of them. There is this law of the sea that tribunal has given an order on the South China Sea. China has rejected it. Other countries have also rejected this. US also did. In fact, in US, if you are supportive of the UN, I have spent a little time there, spoken to them, they will say, oh, all these communists in the United Nations, why should they come? And it is so much that when Obama went to meet Emperor Hirohito in Japan, the big debate in the US was, oh, why is he going? He'll have to bow to the emperor. How can the US president bow to an emperor? Whoever. So they have this conception. This is what is known as American exceptionalism. So now China, which is G2, USA, there is something called Chinese exceptionalism that is emerging. I would say India's interest lies not in taking sides between China and US. Why should we take? Like it was during the non-aligned period, India should make the most of whatever their conflict or China and US are still doing business. Their trade has not come down. And in my book, I have said one thing which can be debated, discussed. It's just a good starting point. I have said, I have proposed, I'm not an expert or anything, there can be 100 suggestions, that India should deal with China exactly as the US does. We should not do what the US asks us to do, which is to pit us against China or whoever. We should do exactly what the US does. So we have to map what the US does. I did it for a few years when they have the security and economic dialogue. You know? There are no fireworks then. They go quietly, sit down and discuss how to take forward the relationship, how it can be mutually profitable for both. You know? China is the largest holder of US Treasury bonds. You see how they are locked? Okay. We'll say if China pulls out, the US economy will collapse. If China pulls out those bonds, 3 trillion of, where will they invest it? There is no other place. In the same way, just as the US cannot let it go, neither can the Chinese pull it out. So they are locked into situation, and these are things we have to be acutely aware of. Thank you.
So my last question before I throw it open to the, we talk about CPEC, especially because,
Yes.
when we talk about China, Pakistan also comes into our view. And then we hear about Balochistan and Chinese having withdrawn from CPEC in a way that it's a losing kind of proposition. And there is this talk about their policy. They're giving around, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it's in African countries, or so. How do you successfully you think that they'll be able to sell this particular thing into other continents or otherwise and profit from that, giving so much investment across, where I think there is also a requirement because Chinese economy at the moment is fraying a bit. There is no internal consumption, though there is a possibility that it's going to rise now. And of course, the trade imbalance is going to continue as far as because there's been the world's factory and supply chain management has always been from China. So how Chinese, you think they will change the tack in terms of trying to give this one road, Silk Road kind of old theory that they had? What is your views on that?
One word, one.
Silk Road or one road, one.
Okay, this Belt and Road Initiative. Okay, this Belt and Road Initiative, it is the comparison I can make is for everyone to understand. I'll simplify it a bit. It is like digital India. When Prime Minister Modi said digital India, it did not mean we will start the process of developing digital processes from the very scratch. It meant a number of things that were already there from the mid-80s, beginning with the telecom revolution and everything. So it was a number of things that were already there everywhere, Department of Telecom and Electronics and various things, you had this fiber optics and all this. And how do you capture it under a single programmatic thrust towards a purposeful objective? In the same way, the Belt and Road Initiative is a number of projects that China has scattered everywhere, in Central Asia, in East Asia, in other countries. They are trying to bring it together under the Belt and Road Initiative and try to make it something composite where it will serve a larger purpose. Now, what is the larger purpose? One thing they expected to, and which they have been explicit about. It is about China spreading its economic influence. And it is about China establishing new outposts in the prevailing geopolitics to shift the power. And I have been to some of these Belt and Road Initiative areas. For instance, one of the areas I went to was Xinjiang. Xinjiang is the center of Asia. It's one of the most backward regions. And you have a lot of ethnic population. They're diverse ethnicity. There are minorities from Russians and Tajiks, and all these people are there. And you'll find actually Russian signboard, Tajik signboards, and everything there. All those food is available. People from Uzbekistan, all of them are there. And you also have these Uyghurs in Xinjiang. They are also a minority. But the Uyghurs are seen as a Muslim minority. No other Muslim community in the world identifies with the Uyghurs. Neither the Shias nor the Sunnis anywhere in the world. None of the.
Are they Turkish origin?
They say they are of Turkish origin, but then so many of the Central Asians are of Turkish origin because they all came down the Black Sea to Central Asia. Now, so China is expanding its reach. Second thing I discovered is when I went to Kazakhstan and also Uzbekistan and both Inner Mongolia and Outer Mongolia, is that now the Inner Mongolia in China has become a hub. I was there in 2016, yes, in Ulaanbaatar for the Asia-Europe Editors Roundtable. And from Ulaanbaatar to Inner Mongolia, they have so many train connections. People don't need visas, travel documents, because they are Mongolians. So they have those things for their own people, And they know there will be no trouble because both are controlled economies. And they are nomadic people. It's difficult to develop them as an industrial working power. From Inner Mongolia, they have 230 trains that are carrying goods to Europe every day. This is already happening. It started from 5-6 trains to 200. This is part of Belt and Road Initiative, but it has already been there. Then I went to the North Harbin where it borders with Siberia and all that. And They had discovered oil there some 25, 30 years ago. That is also part of Belt and Road Initiative, which they are developing towards Vladivostok on the eastern coast of Russia. Then in Central Asia, all the five stans, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all these places, there are a lot of these jihadis who are trickling in there from the Middle East, from Syria and all these things. Okay, the ISIS and all these things. They're just trickling in. And then, actually there, the Belt and Road Initiative is almost like a pact between China and Russia to keep an economic and security fortress. They feel this is happening because there is not enough employment, not enough enterprises. So we create more enterprises and this thing and let people have the job. And both countries are now also exercising their security expertise in keeping a control, their check on people coming. Like now, for instance, it's very interesting that the 5 people or 8 people who were caught for that Crocus City Hall terrorist attack in Moscow, they are Tajiks, you know. So Tajiks are there in large parts of Russia from the days of the Soviet Union. So from where they came, what are their loyalties? The hand might have been the ISIS, but who was holding that hand? This question is there, just like till today it is unresolved that the LTT or its renegades might have killed Rajiv Gandhi, but at the behest of which power or what power? So these questions are there. So this is going. Now Tibet, when you say, I visited Tibet, that was the last time I went to China. I said I've been there enough times, I will not go again. But then they had invited me, and because it included Tibet, and somehow I can't accept that Tibet is China. Tibet is Tibet, you know. So it's a third pole, it's a world by itself and the roof of the world. It's a very fascinating place. And so I went to Tibet and I have found there is extraordinary development in Tibet. Sooner or later, the airport, it's unimaginable the kind of infrastructure they have developed in Tibet. As I'm going down the road, I can hear the gurgle of the Brahmaputra River in China. And there are those mountains. They have built railway tracks on that. There are these roads. For hundreds of miles, there is no human habitation. They have built airports, highways, and tanks, military aircraft, everything can go. They have also built high-speed trains which go at a speed of 350 kilometers between Shigatse and Lhasa. And Shigatse is just a few hundred kilometers north of Nepal. So they have many points of entry should they choose to. Earlier, when we talked about China on the border, we said either north or east, but it is no longer north or east. Now it is north-east, it is coming around. So, and any development, I am convinced, is for military objectives. And it has always been the case, all these roads and all these were not developed for people to drive in cars. Most development at all times in history has taken place for conquest, for war also. So it is no different in these times. So, but Tibet, they will have to open up sooner or later, and they will be planning to open it up, and there will be huge interest in Tibet. Just like US multinationals are the biggest investors in China. The world's largest Coca-Cola factory is in Xinjiang. Why is it there? All the surveillance equipment that China is buying is technology of repression. Everything is from American Western companies. If they are serious about democracy, why doesn't the West refuse to sell them the surveillance technology? All these things which they are using, all the streets. Now, of course, it's happening everywhere. There are cameras on every road, everywhere. You know? So these things, but everybody wants to do business with China. As you said, it is not only the East Asian people, but the East Asians have been cleverer. I think India has something to learn from the policy of ASEAN also. They did not, for instance, when there was eruption of violence in Myanmar, and I think whether it was Thailand or Malaysia, one of them was the chair. They did not take the position that the US and the EU took on the violence in Myanmar. So then India also moderated its position. So I think we should always look both east and west before we arrive at a decision. We cannot always look to Brussels, NATO, EU, and then to Washington. We should look this side because now there is an arc of power stretching from the Mediterranean to the Pacific, beginning with Moscow, Iran, Saudi Arabia, all these things. And we'll have to face it. Tomorrow we may become friends with China. There might be less rivalry, less thought. But in the meantime, you have to build your resources. At all times, you have to safeguard your interests, you have to remain strong, and we cannot afford to have any kind of slackness, either in terms of security, but build our economic muscle. That is the core, I think, for success.
Very nice. Thank you, Shastri. He mentions about one mountain, two tigers. So hopefully that for the Asian century, both India and China get together, and then the Asian century really comes into being.
They can dream about it.
Yeah. So now I'll throw it open to the house, and we'll take 3 questions at a time. We'll take 3 questions at a time. Then you can again, Yeah, please go ahead. Please, is there a mic around?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask a couple of questions, like how in India we were like dominated by the colonial powers for centuries together. So China also faced a lot of opium wars, etc. So did the Chinese face a post-colonial hangover like we in India are facing today, or like we are accepting it today? And the second part, does this post-colonial hangover also impact the way China looks at India in the 1980s and 2020s? My,
Just repeat your question.
yeah, the impact of colonialism on India-China relationship.
India-China relationship.
Yeah,
What in particular?
the colonial influence of, like the colonial mentality and its impact on India-China relationship. Yeah.
Colonial impact. So that is the first question. We'll take 2 more.
Yeah. I just make it up. Yeah.
You see, both of us have had colonial impact.
Yes.
The British had,
Yes.
but then today you find, like what you mentioned,
Yeah.
the Chinese are expansionists.
Yes.
So is that how, it's a kind of a dichotomy?
Yes.
Is that what you meant?
Any comments on the MOU which was signed by Sonia Gandhi and Rajiv Ji? Any comments on the MOU which was signed by Sonia Gandhi and Rajiv Ji? Rahul, I think, was it Rahul Gandhi, during the time when the Olympics were held in Beijing?
There is no mention in the
When the Olympics were held in Beijing, there was an MOU signed, and there's a photograph with Jinping standing in and Anand Sharma watching. As a journalist, would you have any comments on that, or is it mentioned in the book anyway?
Third question.
Sir, like you mentioned, the amazing infrastructure and the social benefits.
Take it closer.
Tushar, I'm
Take it
speaking.
closer.
Wait a minute.
The mic, you take it closer to your mouth.
Okay.
Who is asking, you or he?
Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Okay, next time. Don't worry. We'll get you.
Yeah.
Sir, in today's world, China does pose security threats to its neighbors, be it digitally or through territorial expansion. On the contrary, with initiatives like Make in India for promotion of self-reliance, wouldn't it be hypocritical of India to deal with China as the US does, because they don't face the danger of territorial expansion by China?
What is the importance of? I didn't follow. Just show me what you've written. I'll see.
Okay.
It'll be lot easier.
The last paragraph. Okay. I can repeat it again. I can speak slowly if you want.
It's about COVID.
I can repeat it slowly. So I'll summarize my question in one line. So China does pose territorial expansion and digital threats to many nations in today's world.
I've got this one. I got it.
Okay, you get my question.
So I will answer these 3 questions.
Okay,
First,
sir.
your question about the First, I'll answer the colonial one. This is a very, very interesting and important question. And I think if anybody in this auditorium is interested in pursuing a new area of study, the common history of colonialism that affects India and China is an unexplored area. It's truly an unexplored area in colonial and post-colonial studies. I am really surprised why it is the case. So when I was in Melbourne, I went to a place there called the Institute of Post-Colonial Studies. One of the founders of that institute, there is a, I felt very proud seeing the seminar hall in this Melbourne Institute of Post-Colonial Studies. It's an international institute. It has a seminar hall named after Ashish Nandi, who is one of India's leading sociologists, and it used to be the Center for Study of Developing Societies and everything. So there is a lady now who is the director of that. So when I was there, I asked her, because Australia has also had a lot of relations and still has with China. And they have also negotiated like India, difficult patches. They have come out of it. They have returned to trade. They have broken trade ties and so on. So I asked her, has there been any post-colonial studies looking at how the colonialists treated India and China? She says, no, surprisingly, no. This is really surprising for me because somehow India has chosen, India means the state has got nothing to do with it perhaps, but perhaps the establishment, let us say, that comprises research, the Indian History Congress, all these people who are involved, somewhere, or the Indian Council of Social Sciences Research, the definition of South Asia has remained mainly the subcontinent. You know, you have Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. Okay, strictly speaking, Nepal was never colonized. It was an independent country. But it still has a colonial history because of the Gorkhas and all being recruited in the British Army. Then Bhutan also was not colonial. At one time, the CIA became active. Then those people had to be expelled and everything. Those activities were there. Then later, we have taken in Afghanistan. But surprisingly, it never occurs to anyone why Myanmar, which was as much a part of the British Empire, is another flap of the, say, one flap is India, which included Bangladesh and Pakistan at that time. And the other flap is Myanmar, which is also a multi-ethnic country. Why is it not part of this thing? Actually, the one person who has broken this mold is someone who is one of the few greatest and finest writers of the English language, is Amitav Ghosh. If you read Amitav Ghosh's book, this is called The Glass Palace, he looks at this, colonialism, how it has distorted not just the psyche, the geopolitics perceptions, how on the one hand Indians lived off, made a good living in Myanmar, then Indian soldiers in the British army also killed them, and how the British used Indians against Myanmar people, how the British used the people of Burma, exploited them, with Indian help and used it against India. So he has kind of laid bare these many complex threads. And I would really recommend to people to read this because Burma was a very rich place, very, very rich. They say even those small borders you had on the floor, which were tiled with gems and all, they were diamond. People could just take a few of that, go out and make a livelihood out of it when they fled from there. Similarly, China also, around the same time that we've had the mutiny in India in the 1850s, the British destroyed whole palaces. There was mindless destruction. And even what we saw the Taliban do, the way they destroyed this Bamia Buddha, ransacked large parts of Afghanistan and its heritage, or what the ISIS did in Iraq, this would all pale into nothingness if one looks at the scale of the barbaric destruction that has happened in China, which is similar to what the British did in India, whether it is in Jallianwala Bagh or the way they cut off the hands of the Bengalis who used to weave those muslin weavers and things like that. So I think this is a very important part, and it might actually bring both the countries, all these three countries closer in understanding, a shared burden of history. Because there is a school of thinking that when you say China is rising as a power or it's joining hands with Russia, it is not about China. It is about the 400 or 500 years of colonialism and imperialism began with Columbus' discovery of America. Since then, it is that part of the hemisphere which has ruled this world in one form or the other. Whereas there is a book, I forget the author's name, it brought out just around the time of the Ukraine war. 80% of the world's resources are to the east of the Mediterranean, between the Mediterranean and the Pacific, not between the Mediterranean and that. And we should also remember that this world, their hegemony, is being changed. Many people are supporting this. Just like it is not that people like Biden, but they do not want Trump for the greater danger he represents. So in the same way, people say, we've had enough of these 500 years. Why should we fear China? We've survived the British, we've survived the colonialism and imperialism. All these people, they will find a way of dealing with China also when it acts that way. So it's not about China. So this history of colonialism, it is very important to map it in different ways. To think that it has been mapped and done with and can be put in the bookshelf and forgotten is, I think, still an incomplete stage. The second question was about this COVID and doing trade.
And the fact between Congress Party and
Yeah, yeah. Okay. See, this is one of those gaslights that has been going around for a long time. I have not come across any authoritative person who knows a lot about China. And there are people in Pune International Center who are really some of the best minds in the world on India-China relations, like Mr. Vijay Gokhale. He has been ambassador to China. He has written 3 books. He was foreign secretary. There is nothing that he doesn't know of what went on between India and China. There is nothing that Mr. Gautam Bambawale, who was ambassador to China, does not know. Then you have been there on the border. Then I once spoke to J.J. Singh, who as Chief of Army Staff, he said he had walked more than 10,000 kilometers on the border. That's why he was sent as governor of Arunachal Pradesh. Then General Naravane himself. So I have not heard this from anybody. This is one of those things like that 15 lakh rupees which will come in everybody's bank account that I have only heard about. And this is the 4th or 5th place I am being asked this question. I do not give it any serious credence, I would say that. And I do not know of a single person who has been dealing with China ever taking this seriously. This is the second thing. The third thing is, for instance, if you look at it historically, the Congress party, actually Modi had the best chance to improve relationship with China. He has been the strongest leader. He has visited China more than any other Indian prime minister or political leader. He has visited China 8 or 9 times. Nobody else has had this rapport with the people of China. We should not forget that, if all of you remember, there were 17 Gujaratis who were caught for smuggling and they were kept in the jails there. It was a Herculean thing that he managed to get these Gujarati criminals freed from there, brought to India, how they were dealt with. That is a different matter. But because the Indian population is not yet prepared for that. The Congress party, of course, there is no such thing as a single Congress party. Modi's BJP is different from Vajpayee's BJP. Rajiv Gandhi's Congress was different from Indira Gandhi's Congress. During Indira Gandhi's Congress, it was inconceivable that any kind of effort would be made towards China, although she was a strong leader. It is Rajiv Gandhi who said, put politics aside, move on the economic front, because it is economics that will dictate the direction of international relations. So, and then Narasimha Rao, then they were all people who were different from the mold of Nehru and Indira Gandhi, including Manmohan Singh. He might have been Nehruvian in certain economic philosophy and all that. So, I think that the Congress party would not actually want in relationship to improve with China or Pakistan for that matter. See, it is only Vajpayee who could have gone to China, And even after the attack on Mumbai, what did Vajpayee say? He said, this means we have to talk more. Could any other no Congress prime minister could have said that, you see. So, because in people's mind, they won't say the Congress party has changed. So, and the Congress would not like its legacy. Partition is the legacy of the Congress party. It would never want this to be undone. In the same way, the 1962 conflict is still what rankles. What happened in 2020 doesn't rankle as much as 1962. So that is their legacy. So they will not want amends to be made. That is why they keep targeting the government on this issue. So this is what I would say. And then on this Beijing Olympics. Oh, you are saying that Anand Sharma looking on and all that. No, that is part of the Olympic thing. So many, see, for instance, everybody think the world boycotted this thing. Not many people know that I was in Beyond, I pointed it out, we carried that video. Actually, Taiwan participated in the Olympics in Beijing. There's a Taipei delegation. See, they all get around things when it comes to trade and business. And you should not forget that anyone who thinks that by supporting Taiwan, you will be threatening to China. No. What is Taiwan? It is like what Pimpri is to Bombay or to Pune. It's very too small, you know. It is a Pacific militarizing point for the US. They have to make arms, they have to sell these weapons, and they need various points of conflict for their own economic activity. It is not necessary that we should all get drawn into it. So I don't see that this kind of thing. And
Do you think they're going to withdraw from CPEC because of Balochistan problem?
withdraw from? No. See, Balochistan, the problem is more complex. Actually, I was asked by BBC, the Baloch channel, to speak on this. There again, I took a view. We have to look at where this problem created. Balochistan is not confined to Pakistan. The original Balochistan as a military person or armed forces person, yeah, it extends to Iran, it extends to Afghanistan, Pakistan, you know. So it is 4 countries that are involved. This is again a colonial legacy. The second thing is, the problem the Balochis have is with the Pakistani establishment. Their problem is not with the Chinese. What is the problem? The problem is that Balochistan is a very thinly populated area. Many of them are nomads. So for all these projects that go through Balochistan, the labor is all from outside. And people elsewhere in Pakistan are not prepared to come there. So there are Chinese labor. And wherever the Chinese labor goes, it is sometimes almost pre-colonial conditions. They will go with a Chinese militia. You know? So this also raises hostility. So this is something that has to be negotiated between them. And another thing I want to correct, which is a big impression that is gained, that Pakistan is a cat's paw of China. No, that is not a correct perception. There are a lot of things that Pakistan does for China in international relations. First and foremost, China does not have the heft it should have on the world stage because it is not as much into the Anglo-American axis as India is. This is India's strength. And Pakistan has some access to this Anglo-American axis, including to all the military establishments like Pentagon and everything. Like for instance, the Pakistani general is as welcome at the Pentagon as an Indian general, you see. They can all do business. And these are the services that Pakistan provides to China. Pakistan guards the House of South. It's a military division of the Pakistan Army. And Pakistan has provided the Praetorian Guard for the King of Bahrain. And so many Arab countries, you know. So all these are used by China to cut through for conversation and dialogue with these Arab regimes. It's very, very difficult to carry on a conversation or dialogue with these Arab regimes. If Xi Jinping could finally do it, it was after so many years of preparation and with great contribution by Pakistan, which has now helped Saudi Arabia also come closer to Pakistan. You see? So these things, a lot of changes are happening where we have to take ourselves out of being located in India or Washington. Only then one can see these things. So I would correct these 2 things. Then the third question is about, yes, China poses a security threat. See, suppose you extrapolate the principle of a country posing a security threat, that we should not deal with them. Which are the countries you would deal with? Please tell me. You should not have been dealing with the US, UK, or France, okay? Because they were all against us in the 1971 war. So why are we dealing with them? Please tell me. So I'm saying that you have to safeguard your interests, security interests, no matter what is the threat from whoever it is. You cannot first define that Pakistan is enemy, China is enemy, or US is enemy. No. The security threat today, in terms of technology, comes from all countries. And sometimes when you sit here, it's very different. When you go, for instance, when I was in Beijing, I was invited to talk to some of the ambassadors of the European Union countries. That time, Manmohan Singh had gone to Japan. So they wanted me to speak about India-China relations. So one of them, it didn't occur to me. They said, I think it was a Swedish ambassador or someone who asked me. He said, but do Indians know that Japan is despised and hated more than China in East Asia? They don't. We think that because some of us don't like this. No, because there is so little that is known to the present generation about Japanese militarism. But actually, it has been one of the more cruelest forces that went on a rampage in all over East Asia. And they came very close to Calcutta. And everyone in the armed forces would know that. You know, they were on the border, India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, that area, the American troops. In the Japanese army, you could indent women, like you would ask for a pencil and this thing. This is an item of indent. And even today, in Korea, in Seoul, there is a statue. The Koreans want an apology, you know, and this controversy is going. So, to think that we join hands with Japan and China would be getting the no, that it doesn't happen like that. Our strength will be our economic potential. Okay, so I think first and foremost, India has to do everything to increase its economic. Second thing, your security. What is your security? Cyber security. Huawei is a threat. Doubtless, Huawei is a threat to your telecom network. But so is Ericsson. So is ATT. All the coups in South America were by AT&T, which is the one thing in which AT&T was not involved. You know, in Chile, they was killed by them. There have been all these 5, 6 Central American countries have been reduced to banana republics. They are all by these big multinational corporations. Each of those multinational corporations, their annual revenues are more than the GDP of those countries. How has this situation come about? We have to look at these things. So that is one. Second thing, if you look at cyber security, the threat to you, everybody is going to embed something in what he gives you. And if you are not going to have your information shared with China, there is no reason to have your information shared with UK, US, or any other country. The situation is such that any of them can turn against you. You know? So I think you have to safeguard, you have to take precautions against all countries. And the country that is closer, of course, is a greater threat. And at all, for instance, Galwan, there are many, I don't even know if this is true, but among the many things speculated is that it was expected that the Western countries will come to your support. Not one of them came. Why would they risk the business they are doing with China? Everybody today wants a market, okay? And nobody is going to look at the color or ethnicity of the country which gives them the business. And this is one of the reasons, like I feel that there are powerful sections in China, in the Chinese establishment, in India, and in the Indian establishment, who do not want people-to-people relationship between the two countries. When I was in Beijing, Xinhua news agency had more than 420 or 50 foreigners working there, people who had lost their job in big international agencies like Reuters, AP, AFP, after the economic crisis. So if they can all go and flourish there, why shouldn't you flourish there first? Second thing, when I went there first, there might have been less than 300 people. By the time I left, there were more than 35,000 people, and there were a lot of them who are going to this cold place where it goes to minus 50 degrees, Harbin, where they have this ice and sculpture exhibition and all that. And they're going there to study medicine. Why? Because they can study medicine there for 30 lakhs. You need, I think, at least 2 crore rupees to do medicine in India. So unless you correct these conditions, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is China, you will be weakening yourself. You know? So primary strength is economic. Second is military. I think India is sufficiently militarily strong to deter China in many ways. But as I said earlier, your nuclear deterrence is not going to work if they are going to come with sticks, with fences. And they don't need to do that today. Today you have cyber warfare. We do not know what kind of outages in our networks is being engineered by which enemy country or terrorist group. So threats are very different. You know, we have to, threat perception, yes, constant. But identification of a particular geography alone as a threat will actually take away your focus from the universe of threats that a country is facing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shastri. It's been wonderful listening to you on varied topics. What I'm going to request is some of the people have questions, but maybe they can approach you individually because many others would want to go away. So thank you very much, and I'll hand you back to the coiner.
Thank you, Mr. Shastri and M. Marshal Gokhale, for this very engaging discussion. I now request M. Marshal Gokhale to felicitate Mr. Shastri with books by PIC. I invite Dr. Ishita Ghosh to felicitate M. Marshal Gokhale and Mr. Shastri on behalf of Symbiosis School of Economics. I now invite Dr. Chandini Tiwari from the Symbiosis School of Economics to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lahiri. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose formal vote of thanks for this very special occasion. To start with, on behalf of Symbiosis School of Economics, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to Mr. Shastri Ramachandran. Thank you, sir, for taking out time and have this discussion with the students. And my wish to express the gratitude towards Air Marshal Gokhale. Thank you for being amongst us today, sir. It was a wonderful session. Thank you for chairing and moderating it till the end. We are also extremely grateful to Dr. Lahiri for steering the session from the beginning, delivering welcome address to the time now. I also wish to express my profuse thanks to Geeta ma'am and Professor Jyoti Chandiramani for their minute-to-minute guidance and support throughout this event and to make it successful one, if I may say so. Further, I would like to convey my sincere thanks to Dr. Ishita ma'am for her presence and constant support. Last but not the least, a special word of thanks to the IT team, coordinators, attendants, and my dear students of SSC and SSLA for actively taking part in being here today. My deepest regards and thanks to one and all present here, the senior dignitaries of the dais, from PIC and otherwise. Thank you so much for making this event a successful one. Thank you. May I please invite the guest on the dais and of the dais from PIC to join us for a tea. It is in the cafeteria backstage.